next up, Kintara Therapeutics. We have Zaid Zarabian. Zaid, are you there?
I am. Good morning.
Good morning to you as well. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Wow, you like cars, huh?
It's a hobby, but it's more like an addiction. Yes.
Those are the best hobbies. All right. So for the uninitiated, could you please give us a brief introduction to your company and what you guys do?
Absolutely, be happy to. Kintara is a company that's focused on oncology indications for underserved patients. These are patients where either there's no current therapy or the current therapies are very ineffective. And we have two late-stage compounds that one of them has started a registration study for glioblastoma. And I think at this point, maybe with your agreement, I'll bring up the slide deck and walk through the slide deck.
You're good to go. You know what, Said?
If I can figure out how to do it.
You might want to just close that share and then restart a new one.
Got it.
And I'll be here for moral support while you do that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And sadly, we just practiced all this, and I am going through it the old way. So let me start.
Oh, you had it there for a second.
Share screen. Can you see my screen?
You had it up for a second and then it closed.
Okay, let's try it again.
Yeah, so whatever you did, just do it again.
Yeah, and luckily I'm only able to show your screen and not the presentation.
Can you drag the presentation over onto that?
I will do that. Give me 1 second to go back and find it.
And if all else fails, I believe we have your presentation on file and we are able to present for you.
You do. I assume we're not live, so this is being recorded, so we're not wasting people's time.
We are live.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're going to have to rely on your existing slide deck, which is the same one I have, because I'm unable to share mine.
Chelsea coming in clutch. There it is, Said. And we will advance it every time you say next slide.
Great. Thank you very much. So let's go to the next slide. And this is standard forward-looking statements. We can go to the actual presentation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as I mentioned, Kintara is a diversified oncology company with two late-stage products. Both of these are for clear unmet oncology needs. The first one is for GBM. GBM is a market that's growing from an estimated 800 million in 2018 to 1.4 billion in 2027. The current drug, lead drug for first-line GBM patients, was approved in 1999 and has been generic since 2010. And it's fairly ineffective. The current survival outcome for these patients is less than 5% of them survive beyond 5 years. And the median overall survival for these patients, despite the current therapies, radiation, and surgery improvements, is less than 1.5 years. And we have begun the registration study for that indication as of January 6th of this year. The second indication is for CMBC, cutaneous metastatic breast cancer, and that's an acquisition of an asset we made last August, and that's a phase 3 ready asset, meaning we have a phase 3 study planned, and we're just in the process of manufacturing sufficient quantity of GMP material to initiate that phase 3 study. Both of these compounds have been studied over the years. Initially, the VAL-083, which is the GBM product, has been studied in over 40 phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials by National Cancer Institute, and we estimate they spent about $100 million before we in-licensed it. And similarly, REM-001 had been studied to the tune of another $140 million of investments in the prior companies before we acquired it. So the fact that we have this late-stage asset at Kintara is reflective of almost $250 million of prior investments in multiple phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials. The go-forward plan was to do a study by ourselves, but we agreed with GBM Agile team to participate with them. And I'll go into that in a few minutes. This slide simply shows the status of our advanced products. The first one, GBM, we have orphan drug designation and fast track. For cutaneous metastatic breast cancer, as I said, is phase 3 ready. We also have a few follow-on indications, although at the moment, all of our assets, capital resources, and intellectual assets are going into the 2 phase 3 late-stage products because that's where the highest value accretion can occur. But we will follow on, hopefully, after we've crossed the goal line with one or both of these current indications, with additional indications getting approval for Nevis syndrome, where we have orphan drug designation, and for ovarian cancer, where we also have orphan drug designation from FDA. Next slide. Thank you. On the GBM side, as I mentioned, the market size is fairly large, approximately 30,000 newly diagnosed patients in the US and Europe per year, of which 14,000 become recurrent. And that, I think, is a small indication of the impact of this disease, because the vast majority of the patients don't even get to become recurrent because they pass away. The plan is we have executed a plan with an FDA-approved and highly endorsed adaptive design trial with involvement from numerous GBM KOLs, and we're doing it with partnership with a group of 130 clinicians who founded an organization called GCAR, Global Coalition for Adaptive Research. I will go further into that because, in my view, their clinical trial design that we're participating is probably, if not very likely, the best GBM clinical trial design on the planet at the moment. And we're very proud and pleased to be participating in this partnership. Of interest is there is 3 separate patient groups being analyzed and studied in this. There is newly diagnosed unmethylated, which is approximately 60% of GBM patients that have an enzyme that repairs the damage done by the current first-line therapy. These patients have even a worse outcome than the average patients that I mentioned before. The second group is newly diagnosed methylated. These are the patients who do not have this enzyme, who generally fare a little bit better in survival than the unmethylated patients, but still not very highly. And of course, the last patient group's recurrent. Of interest is the fact that Kintara is the only one of the 3 companies in this platform study that has been approved by GCAR and by FDA to be studying all 3 patient groups. And that, I think, gives us an advantage in respect to the potential market size we can address and the number of shots on goal, because this trial design allows 1, 2, or all 3 of these patient subtypes to be approved going forward. Next slide, please. These are just a high-level summary of our phase 2 open-label trials status. These are ongoing trials. We expect to finish these. 2 of them have been fully enrolled. 1 is still enrolling. And the interesting component here is, although these are open-label trials, comparator to historical data, we are showing improved survival versus all 3 patient groups versus historical data. So that's encouraging as we go forward to be able to show that in every patient group that we're studying Valo83 and GBM, we are beating the standard of care. Next slide. Thank you. I mentioned about GBM Agile and GCAR. GCAR was founded in 2017 with the single goal of accelerating drug development for deadly diseases. They're a nonprofit organization. They were funded by National Brain Tumor Society, National Foundation for Cancer Research, Asian Foundation for Cancer Research. And over the past 4 years, they have designed and received approval from FDA for a platform study with an international effort for newly diagnosed and recurrent GBM, exactly the patient populations that we have been studying. It's a master protocol with 3 experimental arms versus a common control. And that simply means there can be 3 companies' assets being studied at the same time, and we all get compared to a common control. In GBM, obviously, the primary endpoint is overall survival. We have to improve the survival of patients. And the advantage of a registration pathway through an adaptive design is that it's a seamless phase 3, phase 2 study. That means all of the phase 2 patients will be used in the final analysis versus a normal trial where you do a phase 2 study, finish it, and then you do a separate and distinct phase 3 study. The adaptive design nature of this study allows the phase 2 patients to be counted as part of the phase 3 in a seamless design. That saves time and money. And this group, lucky for Kintara, the first indication GCAR decided to go after was GBM, which is very advantageous for us. The size of the trial, although eventually it will enroll well over 1,000 patients, so it's a very large trial. On the Kintara arm, we are 150 to 200 patients maximum, stratified by the 3 subtypes that I stated we uniquely are qualified to study. So the size of the dosed patient population will be 150 to 200 patients in these 3 studies in totality. Next slide, please. Thank you. I mentioned regulatory buy-in. On the right-hand side, you'll see a quote from Janet Woodcock from FDA, Drug Evaluation and Research, that not only highlights the value of platform trials, but also states how important GBM Agile is by potentially raising the bar for all clinical trials. Obviously, this is something that a commercial company like this could not achieve, but because GCAR is a nonprofit trying to accelerate drug development and thus lower the cost of drugs, they have strong support. It's a turnkey solution, which is strongly advantageous for smaller companies. That means that we supply the drug, we provide some oversight, but GCAR and the GBM Agile team do everything else. They have the CRO and they have the statisticians who are world-class CROs and statisticians. They currently have over 35 US sites enrolling. And they just announced the first Canadian site being added, and 2021 plans are to include European Union and China. The benefit of the shared control group is multifold. First, it contains the cost and accelerates the speed of the study. And by that, I mean we, Kintara, only pay for 1/3 the cost of the control arm. The other 2 companies that are in this study with us, that I'll show in the next slide, share that cost. So that's a cost reduction to all of us. But the other advantage for Kintara is, although we just joined this trial, patient initiation enrollment as of January 6th of this year, we benefit from all the control arm patients that have been enrolling since June of 2019. And that's a tremendous speed advantage, obviously, versus starting the trial and allocating the patients to control arm and the drug arm. So the fact that this study started 2 years ago with control arm patient recruitment is tremendously valuable. It has taken GCAR 4 years to get the trial approved, to sign 35 US sites, and to initiate the trial, where in a matter of 3 or 4 months, we're benefiting from site enrollment at many of those sites already, and the control arm that's been enrolling since 2019, June of 2019. So in combination, the adaptive design, which allows us to go into 3 patient groups with the same number of patients, the initiation of the patient enrollment for the control arm since June, and the fact that GCAR GBM Agile already has over 35 sites, saves what we estimate to be well over 2 to 4 years versus us doing these 3 patient groups in a serial fashion, one at a time, and tens of millions of dollars in cost reduction versus running 3 separate trials, one for each one of these patient groups. And lastly, it saves energy, time, and risk, because as a turnkey solution, we don't have to scale up the fixed expenses of Kintara by hiring a lot of extra people to manage this trial. And because GCAR is a nonprofit, we're not paying a profit margin on top of their expenses. So what Kintara pays for is the patients we dose or get dosed on our behalf, and 1/3 of the control arm. Next slide, please. Thank you. No, two. One back, please. This is just a small sampling of the sites that are enrolling for the GBM Agile trial. And as you can see, if you're at all familiar with oncology, these are the major centers for GBM. Henry Ford, certainly Memorial Sloan Kettering, Duke University, University of Texas MD Anderson, where we have been executing our phase 2 trials. So having this level of centers that have signed on to run this trial is of tremendous value, not just in speed, but also in execution. I think we all know clinical trials are a major win or fail point of any drug development activity, and having this kind of trial design, this kind of partners as partners for Kintara materially improves the chances of success. Next slide. Thank you. As I mentioned, this is a platform trial. There's two other companies, Bayer, regorafenib, and Kazia are in this trial with us. But as I said before, we are uniquely approved by FDA and GCAR to be in all three patient groups. Both Bayer and Kazia are in patient group 1 and 3 in the sub-bullet 2, where we are in all three patient groups, which enhances the chances of success by giving us 3 chances on goal, and increases the market share accessibility by giving us access to that extra 40% of GBM patients. And as I said before, we have already initiated patient randomization in this trial as of January 6th of this year, and all indications are that the GBM Agile program is actually ahead of schedule in site enrollment and patient enrollment. So we are incredibly pleased with the partnership. Next slide. Thank you. The second asset, this was acquired in August of 2020, is yet another major unmet medical need. It's estimated to impact 40,000 patients in the US, representing approximately a $500 million market opportunity. This is a form of breast cancer. It's a clinical aspect, which is a highly morbid form of breast cancer that's indicated by open lesions on the surface of the back, chest wall, and neck of patients. These open lesions are bleeding, infectious, they're quite often malodorous, and patients have so much pain where they have to take narcotics for pain control. And sadly, the suicide rate amongst these patients is extremely high. Similar to GBM, where the current indication and the current drug is less than optimal, the current therapies for CMBC are very limited. Both chemotherapy and radiation have very limited impact in this disease. Next slide. Per the GBM presentation that I mentioned, we have had 4 separate studies that have been executed in CMBC with 149 patients. On the left-hand side, you can see 2 of those had a control arm with a complete response rate of roughly 15%. The average of the 4 studies that were done with our second-generation photodynamic therapy is an 80% complete response rate. And this is based on 149 patients and 674 lesions that were treated and evaluated. The method of treatment for this drug is fairly easy. It's an outpatient treatment. The patient comes in one day where the drug is infused, and 24 hours later, after the drug has accumulated in these CMBC tumors, we activate, the physician, I should say, activates the compound by using a simple off-the-shelf red laser light. So although it's a systemic infusion, it's only activated on a lesion-by-lesion basis. And that's the advantage that adds some safety to this drug. In addition, because of the previous studies that have been done, there is a safety database of 1,100 patients that have been dosed with this compound. As a matter of fact, this drug actually, with a prior owner, reached an approvable endpoint for an ophthalmology indication. But by the time the company started going to that path, another company had come with a better drug that had slightly better results. So this company couldn't go ahead, but they did reach an approvable endpoint. These previous trials have allowed us to optimize the current trial design, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. Next slide, please. The CMBC development plan, although it seems very complicated, is pretty simple. We are currently in the process of manufacturing sufficient quantity of drug to start and finish our phase 3 study. That's got to be a GMP material. And indeed, although our GBM trials have not been impacted by COVID, to our very great surprise, this particular development plan did, because most of the manufacturing companies that have the wherewithal to manufacture this drug have been too busy or working understaffed. So the current plan is to get an engineering run in the third quarter and initiate this trial in the fourth quarter of this year or the beginning of next year. Part of this new trial design is to try a 15-patient stage 1, which is to try a lower dose than in previous studies. And the reason for that is there is belief that because these lesions are topical, a lower dose might not only be as efficacious, but also allow for a much faster healing time. So the phase 3 design has a lead-in portion with a lower dose. If we succeed with a lower dose, that will be the go-forward plan with an accelerated path to get the trial finished. And if not, the 1.2 mg current dose is locked and loaded, and that's what we'll go forward with. Next slide.
Hey, Zaid, we are at time, so final remarks.
Okay, thank you. In closing, I think Kintara is a late-stage company with 2 late-stage assets, one for GBM, one for CMBC, both multi-hundred-million-dollar revenue streams. The GBM trial has already started the final stage. It's expected to yield a graduation signal sometime in the first half of next year, after which we'll only need to recruit 50 more patients before a hope for NDA. And CMBC is a phase 3 trial that's expected to initiate in Q4 of this year or Q1 of next year with a 15-patient lead-in. And we have additional data that will be released in the middle and later this year to show forward momentum on both of these programs.
Very interesting stuff, Zaid. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.